Hi. So, just like in the other panel, when there's a massive amount of people, this makes me very excited to see all of you beautiful people, and also very nerve-wracking for me. As I tell everyone, if I get 5 people to show up to my panels, I already call it a success. So to see all of you here, I don't know what else to say, just thank you. It really warms my heart. And also, I was up until 3 a.m. Yeah, so thank you very much for being here. So my name is Javon Gord. I am a 3rd-year PhD student in the School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering. I am also a bona fide games researcher, so I study in particularly the African American community within the fighting game community. So that is my area of research. So does that mean I get to go to Eagle for free? Yeah. It's for research, so. But thank you all for being here. So I have notes and stuff, so if I look like I'm looking down, it's because I'm reading through my notes. So let's get started. For the format of my panels, typically I don't mind questions in between, but we ran into maybe an issue of going over time. So if you have a question, and trust me, I love your questions, right? Just hold it for me, and then I'll leave plenty of time for the Q&A. Does that sound fair?
Yes.
But if there's a question, I don't know what he just said, or a clarifying question, then sure, okay? Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool beans. So yes, as you see right here on the screen, it's called Gamifying Blackness, a discussion on African American portrayals in contemporary video games. So the topic of today's conversation will be focused on the relationship between virtual environments and people. Specifically, the relationship between video games and social actors, such as a game player, game producers, publishers, etc. This conversation will be centered around identifying and contextualizing the representations of Black people in video games and in real spaces. This is an open-ended conversation which discusses what it means to be accurately represented in video games, tracing a brief history of Black stereotypes in games, and overall the current state of being Black in gaming culture. Representations can embody values and beliefs, and representation can be a site for conflict and contestation. So that means I'm about to be saying a lot of stuff. Pretty much, if you didn't follow that, I'll be saying a lot of stuff. So, if anything, I have a few objectives. Contextualize the meaning of representation as it relates to video games. Understand the current state of Blackness portrayals in video games, and also examine the experiences of gaming while Black, okay? So, I'm a games researcher. So for me, slide 3, slide 4 doesn't do justice to games, so I have levels. So what is representation, right? And in this context, this is not a rhetorical question. So from the audience, what do you think? What is representation, as a term? Yes.
Just the feeling that you're portrayed, the characters portrayed that look like you or sound like you, they're not stereotypical, they're portrayed as actual human beings in the same way that we all are human beings, we all have different sides, we all have different stuff going on. It's not just that one character that is Black and thinks or whether
Anyone else? Yes.
A depiction done in good faith, regardless of whether or not the original creator of the work is of the group they're depicting.
Okay.
It needs to be a good faith effort, essentially, and obviously getting it right, but it can't be done meanly.
Okay, very good points. So, here's what I would call textbook definitions of representation. So this comes from Merriam-Webster. Representation, the act or action of representing. And then you have represent, to serve as a sign or symbol, to portray or exhibit in art, to serve as the counterpart or image of, to describe as having a specified character or quality, right? So that is the textbook definition of what we think, or what people think representation should mean as a term. So here's the very academic term of it, right? So it's adding a little bit of nuance, as I like to put it. So this comes from a person named Alfreda Friosik. She is a media scholar at the University of Pittsburgh. And in her work, she puts that this concept helps scholars to move beyond understanding media messages as simply a portrayal or reflection of reality. And beyond just mirroring reality, representations in the media, such as in film, television, photography, and print journalism, create reality and normalize specific worldviews or ideologies. Does this make sense so far? So that means the way in which we view things through another medium, via newspaper, a literary work, right, via depictions of art in museums, right? That is a certain kind of way of how some people actually view those people, right? Which has its own problematic occurrences, as some of you may be aware of, right? So, to dig deeper, I would like to think, let's begin to think about why, how, and are manners of representation in video games different from other forms of media? Looking specifically at representations of blackness and aesthetic culture in video games, I have a few thoughts and concerns. So I picked these four in particular because they're different forms of media, right? So we have Harry Potter, the literary text, right? We have My Hero Academia, right? Which I love, by the way. We have Fortnite, right? And we also have Sense8, which honestly should have kept going, but that's whatever. I was just like, well, that's an orgy. Anywho, don't watch it at work like I did. I was like, oh, I didn't know. So, right? But these are different forms of media, right? So we see representations of LGBTQ people represented in film, right? We also have just the way of blacks depicted in video games, and also just the way we think about people, right, in a literary text, right? All forms of media, just like video games. I want to establish that real fast because there's been far too long people keep thinking that here is everything else, but video games, that's that foreign alien, I don't understand. And I'm just like, no. Just like how there can be depictions of Arab people being misrepresented, how Mexican people can be misrepresented in television and in film, video games is susceptible to the same thing. Does this make sense?
Yes.
So, being black, a virtual experience. So, if your likeness was put into a video game, what are some characteristics that you would describe your character? This is, again, not a rhetorical question. I would actually like to know from people. One or two people. So, yeah, right? Some of you are just like, I don't know, right? Again, if your likeness is put into a video game, right? You as a person, what are some characters?
For some of us, the context of imagining ourselves in video games doesn't really exist. Like, I'm a trans man, and I literally cannot think of any context in which a trans man has existed in a video game. And add that to intersections of other parts of my identity, I don't know whether I could imagine that in a AAA game or even an indie game. So that's sort of a difficult thing to ponder.
Yeah, it's not an easy question. Yeah.
I would imagine or would like thick thighs, brown eyes, anime sparkles, a pot of J-pop snarling me, and baldness with a big bushy beard. That would be what I would hope to see.
Okay. So, as I mentioned before, right, I'm very interested in thinking about representations of blackness in particular, right? But I have a few thoughts and concerns. One being representations can embody values and beliefs about the nature of things, right? So the nature of being black in a particular space. Representations can embody ethics about how things should be perceived and understood by others, outsiders, right? Do we understand what I mean by that? So how people view you. Representation is a site of conflict and contestation, as I mentioned before, right? So the way you move through a particular space, the way all of you are moving through MAGFest as a person means something to the person next to you. Does that make sense? Lastly, representation is about understanding a larger ethical drama around such practices in popular culture. So that gets to the depiction kind of thing. So here I have a few slides, right? Let me make sure yes. So video games are another form of media. Therefore, they are susceptible to the same tropes, myths, representations, and stereotypes as other forms of media. We are going to take a quick peek at just a few of these black character representations. Here I picked 4, each from a different genre of video games. Before I begin, you may have noticed that there are only 3 black men and only 1 black woman. That was not an accident. That is to be reflexive of what the culture currently stands when it comes to black women representation as a character first and foremost, right? Does this make sense? Yeah. That sounds like church. I wasn't expecting it. I was like, wow. So let me first start with Augustus Cole, aka Coltrane from the Gears of War franchise, known for his expressive and over-the-top attitude, slightly impatient as well. He used to be a pro thrash ball player, but the protective covering resembles that of a football player. He literally, in my mind, is the embodiment of an irrational fear of the strong, aggressive, animalistic, athletic black male stereotype. So if this works, hopefully you'll see what I mean.
Log in and see what you can find.
Oh, wait. Actually, the audio's coming from the projector.
I don't know how.
It's fine. I'll roll with the punches. So pretty much in this video, in this scene, we have Augustus Coltrane basically talking about him fighting against the enemy for like a hot second, right? And then all of a sudden, it's just like, woo! Yeah, we're gonna beat your fucking ass, this and this and this and this and this, you know who you messing with, da 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 da. Like all these things in particular, black vernacular, if that's even a thing, right? In such a manner, and he's like the most loud one out of all of them, right? And just his physical structure, right, is also that being reflective of like this hyper masculine identity, right? And he used to be a football player. We're talking about the apocalypse in this game. Black man gotta be a pro football player as his history. Like the way that game just formulates what it looks like, and then it doesn't help at the end where his white counterpart comes out and say, "No, you did great. I like what you just did there." So now it's just like this, like, "Oh, I appreciate you acting in this particular manner." But what does that say about the game in and of itself reflecting blackness, right? I think maybe in this one it's just more about the video, not the audio. But in this one, this is Lincoln Clay, who was a black man of mixed race set in New Bordeaux, which is a fictionalized New Orleans. It's set in 1968. So Lincoln can easily be seen as an aggressive black man bent on revenge, but we must remember that context matters, right? So here is just a snippet of like the trailer. So just take this in for a hot second. So from that trailer alone, you probably have a lot of ideas and thoughts about who Lincoln Clay is in its totality, right? So it's just like, okay, Javon, you just said he was in 1968, so what does that mean? Well, during that time, you had lots of rampant racism, right? And this is also New Orleans, right? And Lincoln Clay is a veteran from the Vietnam War. And so it seems on its surface that he's just gonna be another black man with a weapon and a gun. But if you play the game, then you understand that there's a little bit more nuance to him, right? So we have here, I think that's the bottom left, Babe from Assassin's Creed Origins, which is based in ancient Egypt. He is a magi, which is a group of highly trained police force, and a husband and also a father. Babe is a well-tempered yet stern individual in which he, yes, does kill a part of his character, but the narrative itself gives you ways of thinking about it, right? It's not just blindly killing people. And lastly, you have Michonne from the Walking Dead series and also her own Telltale's miniseries. A strong black woman lead protagonist with a troubling past. Thus, she shelters information about herself while fighting her own demons. So here we have a range of black character roles and backstories, but these are authentic representations are still far and few between. Does this make sense so far? Right, so what I'm showing you here is not all of blackness in video games. As it currently stands, this is where we're at, but it shouldn't be that way is what I'm saying. Does this make sense? Black skin is difficult. And so an article called Black Skin is a radical concept in video games written by Yusuf Cole and Tanya the Past. Tanya, say hi. They discuss the persistent problems in the creation and reflection of black people. Lighting of black and brown characters in video games is still an issue where the look is disconnected from the world. Blatant colorism is still consistent in which certain shades of skin are still a problem, right? So here, we talk about lighting. So lighting techniques and inconsistent framing can lead a character to go from being well lit, barely visible in a few tugs of the thumbstick, right? So that basically saying that sometimes we have black characters that literally fade into its own game, like fade into the background. So here's an image, and if it's hard to see, then that's the point, right? Because here we have two Nords, right? One white, and the other one is a red guard, right?
Red guard.
Okay, right? So one white and the other one red guard, right? And so on the top, you can clearly see like there's a lighting problem, but the bottom is definitely apparent, right? So you have being able to see at least the person's face on the lower right side, but when it comes to the lower left side, next to a fireplace, mind you, right? Fades right in, right? You can't even distinguish if that's actually like a human face structure at all. Does this make sense? Right? So just lighting blackness, right, is a current issue in the culture.
That actually goes back all the way to the development of color film, right? It was actually,
Yeah. Film, history of film starts with sherry card, I believe that's what they're called, right? Depiction of a white woman, right? So when you started to film blackness or people of color in general, they were wondering, well, how come blackness doesn't look as good? Well, that's because you used whiteness as the normal framing anyway. And when you do that, all it does is just make everything else seem much darker than what it actually is. Does this make sense? You made me brief on my film picture, so. So, level 3, being black in real life. So what can be learned from experiences of professionals who endure an overwhelming amount of toxic behavior? So now this is when I start to talk a little bit more about esports, but it's not supposed to be like necessarily esports related in that sense, but I think it's a prime example when we follow particular people who have particular kinds of clout, right? And then what happens to, in particular, people of color who have particular kinds of clout. What is that other side that we sometimes do not see? Right? What is the thing that they're going through that people are just not engaging with, right? Raise your hand if you know who this person is.
Yeah. My kid, my baby.
Did someone say my baby? Like I heard on this side, I don't know who. Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Right, okay. So, this is Dominic Sonic Fox McLean, right? Dominic Sonic Fox McLean. He's an esports player within the fighting game community. Dominic, as well as being black, is also, and I quote from his Game Awards acceptance speech, super gay and a furry. This is church. Anywho, within the embodiment of two marginalized identities, it is plausible to assume Sonic Fox has had his fair share of rude and racist comments. Does this make sense? So here's a brief history. I love that YouTube series. A brief history of, yes, so this is a brief history of Sonic Fox. Currently he's 20. He's from Delaware. He goes to New York Institute of Technology, but if you watch an interview that he did, he currently wants to drop out of school because esports is making too much money for him. So I'm like, yeah, why are you? He's been competing since he was 13. Known for Mortal Kombat 9, Excel, Skullgirls, and Injustice: Gods Among Us. He's a 3-time EVO champion, 2015, 2016, and 2018, and a 3-time ESL Pro League champion for Mortal Kombat X. And as of last night, when I checked this, he's currently worth roughly around $525,000 from his winnings from 72 tournaments. So this man gets around. However, right, so these two tweets come from Sonic Fox when he was at CEO FGC tournament in early July of 2018, which is based in Florida. And on the left, he tweeted out, I do definitely think the area, he's talking about Florida, think the area should be addressed next year at the CEO's Jabali for CEO. The area, as a black man, may be highly uncomfortable with the amount of openly racist shit there. The venue is 10 out of 10, but something should be done here. Someone on the right said, I definitely got some insanely ranted shit said to me on the streets too. I ate in the venue a lot because I just didn't want to go outside, LOL. And then Sonic replied, yeah, mad crackheads and Confederate flags, plus the casual racism here was not a good look. I only enjoyed the beach in the venue, but I like my safety secured more than all of that. Right, so what does that mean to be a person of particular clout, right? To be noted for your skill set, but at the end of the day, America finds you as this one thing, right? So that means he could be a 3-time EVO World Champion, all he wants to be, but the moment he steps outside, right, anyone can call him the N-word, right? Anyone can say this particular thing to him, right? So that removes his agency, and we're not just talking about him. I'm using Sonic Fox because he has this particular clout. But if this person has a particular kind of clout and still has to deal with this, what do you think everyone else is having to deal with on like a daily, right? Racism, Hearthstone, and Twitch. So this is an article from Polygon that talks about a particular incident with a Hearthstone player named Terrence Miller. Unfortunately, in reality, black people are still seen as less than, and for black players, that can be quite known in online communities. In May of 2016, a player by the name of Terrence Miller competed in a tournament playing the popular online game Hearthstone. During a Twitch livestream interview, the chat was bombarded with racially charged comments. Sadly, he stated, I knew it would be bad, but I didn't think it would be that bad. Therefore, he knew his blackness was going to be used as a weapon against him. Sadly, and I still can't believe this actually happened. Sadly, this occurred again during a TwitchCon panel with Terrence Miller and other black streamers. Almost oxymoronically, people in the chat were using the tryhard emote, which is the face of a black man, as a slur to avoid deletion of typed racially charged comments. So, to reiterate, Terrence Miller was playing in this tournament, right? He had no idea what was going on, and being flooded with these racist comments inside, right? But he already felt that that was already a thing that was going to happen regardless anyway, right? Which in and of itself speaks to the culture, right? Then he goes to a TwitchCon panel about diversity, and has the exact same thing happen to him, but except people are using the emote, right? And since it's an emote, you can't really delete someone or like put someone in timeout because it's an emote, right? That's a way around the system. So that's one way that racism in and of itself can change forms. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They use that during GDQ as well, the trolls do. Regularly, there's another emote that they use, particularly whenever, usually trans women are playing. They often spam a particular emote to avoid the bans there, and they spam the same emote if there's a black player on screen as well. And the fact that GDQ has done a very bad job addressing that as a charitable organization is kind of shameful.
It is very interesting. Just hold your comments like very in, okay? Thank you. So the next part, level 4, gamifying blackness. Oh wow, there's a level about gamifying black, and it's a talk too? Thought of it. Anywho, what are strategies and or tactics, right, in which to create equitable and equal representation in space for people of color? And it's a loaded question. Like, it's a loaded question, it's a very hard question, but this is the question and many others that needs to be addressed as part of the culture. So here, if you don't know who Shauna L. Gray is, you should. She wrote a book called Race, Gender, and Deviance in Xbox Live, Theoretical Perspectives from the Virtual Margins. And I'm just going to read verbatim from the slide. So in November of 2008, Xbox Live introduced the new Xbox experience and featured the addition of Netflix and other types of applications. The forced creation of avatars and the introduction of the party chat system allowing gamers to enter a private chat room. The party system was actually proven useful for gamers who experience discrimination in the Xbox space, allowing them to self-segregate from the larger gaming community, right? So on Xbox Live, you can be in your own groups, right? You can have party chats, which is one-on-one, you know. However, this creates a problem in addressing meaningful solutions to verbal abuse within the space. Segregating gamers does nothing to offset the verbal abuse inherent in the space. Does that make sense? Right, so just because you can somehow avoid what is happening doesn't mean the problem has gone anywhere. Does this make sense? Yeah. And I just really like this quote. Gaming audiences who consume the images and stories attached to this racialized narrative begin to associate the mediated content with the real world. So what is that saying? And that's pretty much saying that the way in which people view themselves in online spaces, the way in which people view this caricature in online spaces could be reflective of how they actually view that actual person, that actual identity, right? So therefore, if you view blackness in these particular kinds of ways, there will be and are people that think that is all what blackness is all about. That is what blackness has to offer, right? And also many other marginalized identities from that point on. So when I think about representation, it's kind of hard because it's like, is it an ideology or is it a practice? Right? Because if you're practicing good representation, then does that mean you're just trying to be inclusive, right? That means you're trying to have a black person in the front of the picture, right? Those kinds of things, right? Is it just a simple like way of thinking, right? How do we put that way of thinking into an actual action? And so I frame it as additional appropriated constructs of blackness through diaspora. Well, that just basically means I'm thinking of blackness as not just being this and that, but it can be all of these things and more. Does this make sense so far? And then viewing others and or thyself and what it means to be black while a part of multifaceted gaming community. Right, so what does it mean, a black identified person, a part of a global gaming community? Right, so what does it mean that people view your blackness in this American context, but what does it mean for people that you play online with who are from Australia, who are from Japan, X, Y, and Z? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So, it is no secret about the rampancy and danger of online harassment. For since we value diversity and integration, actions that people perform that are adversarial to those values are rightfully challenged. Bullying, swatting, and DDoS attacks, blatant racism can lead to segregated communities. When communities are misrepresented and or inaccurate information is used to classify a group, this has a potential to justify certain prejudices, such as if black on black crime is used to describe a particular perspective of viewing violence committed by black people, then that could and has already translated to a stereotype that blacks are inherently violent people. Does that part make sense? And therefore, justifying racialized ideologies that may form to blatant acts of discrimination. So therefore, the way in which people talk about blackness and its saliency could be indicative of the culture. And therefore, in order to alleviate some of these online issues, we must alleviate the culture in and of itself, right? We can create all the fancy software that we want to, but we're not addressing the actual problem, which is the people, then we'll be just creating software to just do more of segregating ourselves than putting us together. Does this make sense? So I will leave it with this quote that comes from Cole and Tanya's article. Ultimately, as with everything else, when it comes to diversity in games, it will take marginalized players and developers alike to make themselves heard and create art that challenges the status quo, which still pretends white faces are the norm, while casting shade on a vibrant and colorful world. Thank you. So this panel actually ends at 7, and I did this intentionally, and so you have plenty of time to like ask questions. But now there's a lot of you in here, so please ask a question, right? I appreciate the stories, and I really do, and by all means, after the panel is done with, we can have those kind of one-on-ones. But if have an actual like question, and so I can get to like the next person, and so on and so forth. Okay? It's not to be rude; it's to be timely. I want to hear all of you, right? But I can't hear all of you if you're all trying to tell me that you like this game a lot and you talk about the game for 3 minutes, right? Okay? So, is there a microphone like in the room? There's a staff person in here. There's an extra microphone in the room at all.
We can just be loud.
Well, yeah, it's being recorded, so I want to make sure that everyone can sit here.
Worst case, I might just have to hold it for you, but it should be fine.
So I want people to form up.
Yeah.
This way? Is that? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So if you have a question, just funnel in the middle, and then this gentleman will pass the mic on to you.
Oh yeah, wrong.
Yeah, so just go ahead and funnel in. Yeah, question?
It's like real short, but yeah.
Alright, yeah, so actually just because a lot of like streaming, especially on Twitch, has been really exploded in like the last couple of years. I'm wondering if you know a whole lot about like the different levels of response Twitch might give given the streamer about different types of harassment that they may be receiving. And if you want to kick the question to Tanya, well, if you feel cool with that.
Tanya, you're the expert in the room. I'm sorry.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
If you don't know who Tanya DePass is a Twitch streamer, and in particular a partner of Twitch. Thank you.
I'm charging you for getting on this panel. So for those that don't know, Twitch actually does not respond to you when you make a complaint or report. Even Twitter at least says, hey, this account is in violation. So I do know that an actual person does read it, but no matter if they are asked by publication, if you submit something, it looks like it goes into the void. And the reason I kind of burst out laughing, and that was like ugly laughter, is because I've been dealing with a stalker for 3 weeks on Twitch and Twitter and other places because dude is creepy. And he still has an account. And I'm not sure who saw the news the other day, but a dude who was shown beating his wife on stream was unbanned. The account's back down, but this is after a public outrage. So it seems like there's kind of you get one chance, or, because to me it's I don't want to say it's a approval of this activity, but taking his account away for however long it was down and then letting him come back reads as a very bad, oops, we should have undone that. And I know that there will probably never be an actual explanation, but if you submit a report to Twitch, you will never get an answer, at least the way it stands now. So, sorry to tell you that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, that's loud. My question was kind of looking at this whole like having to take representation upon themselves. Could you talk a little bit about like the barriers to that, you know, because there's a lot of like barriers to like people of color getting into a lot of these fields and these jobs like systematically. So I was just kind of wondering if you had any research or comments about that.
About barriers and how to get people of color.
How to get people of color like into these fields a little bit easier.
Thank you. You talking about when you say fields, or you talking about like just game development spaces?
Yeah, gaming, designing, like all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
If you know what's cool, I was curious.
Okay. So that's a question that I honestly wish I had a great answer to. The reason I don't have a great answer to it is because there needs to be systems put in place that allows the access for people of color, and not just people of color, but people of just different identities, to be able to even gain access to the basic stuff to do game development. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Right? Because for me, I've never ever did any game development until this past fall. But I am a PhD student. That means I have privilege up the yin yang, right? Which means I have access to this software that costs God knows how much money, right? I don't know these things because the university pays for it, right? But when it comes to the actual institutional structures, right? So say if I want to work for EA, and if you do, then I want to talk to you because I question I do. But if you want to work for like an EA or Bethesda Game Studios, stuff like that, right? There should be systems put in place. Now, does it sound like I'm saying there should be an affirmative action for game development spaces? That's its own kind of thing. What I am saying is there should be an initiative on the company's behalf, to get people of different identities in these spaces. Sorry, not sorry, but I've seen the statistics, and still, globally, most of game development are European based, right? Ancestry, right? Still most of that. Do you want to know the number of African Americans based on the IGDA report? Because I know the answer.
Yes.
1%.
It's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Yeah, it is.
It is. It's literally slightly more than that. We're talking about like 3 or 4%, right? African American representation in game development, right? That is out of, I think, 1,000 respondents, right? But still, if that is only 5% of 1,000, we're talking about something way bigger than that, right? So if we want more people of color in there, we actually need to have our allies in these spaces already looking out for our other allies to get us into those spaces even more so. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I got me in church preaching.
So could you speak more on the differences between like representation and exploitation? I'm thinking specifically of like the recent stuff in the news about like Fortnite, like using like African American musicians like dances as a product. Is that something that you could speak more on?
Okay. I can say something about it. I can say something if it's correct or not, I don't know. Difference between representation and exploitation. That comes down to if the culture and society in which it's coming from and its meaning comes from. But here's the thing. Representation and exploitation. You're kind of assuming that representation means good, right, and positive. That's honestly why I created this panel, right? Because I am having everyone confront that just because we say representation, that doesn't mean that the representation isn't inherently positive. Exploitation, that's just the very negative end of it, because that means someone else is gaining from it. But you can also gain from representation, right? Mafia 3, that's Lincoln Clay's a black man. They are gaining profit off of his virtual blackface. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the difference comes down, semantics, really, but at the end of the day, if you want to avoid bad representation, for example, if you want to create a trans person in the video game, you should actually talk to trans people first before you write any fucking thing. Yep. Sorry for my French, but, right? You should do that first, right? Will that be the end-all be-all? No, because people are trying to find the easy way to codify an entire race of people, which you cannot do. right? Especially when you are trying to contextualize a history of people that we don't know much about. I don't know much about South Korean culture, so why the hell would I write something about South Korean culture if I don't do my work? I'm a researcher, that's my job. But other people, they're trying to find like the 2 snippets. I'm sorry, you just can't explain asexuality in 2 sentences. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Facts! So, to address your question, the difference between representation and exploitation, I won't say that they are completely different, but there is a line that is crossed more with exploitation, right, than just simple representation. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
After listening to the presentation, I think it's clear we still have a ways to go. But have you noticed over the last, say, 10, 20 years, has the representation improved? Have you seen any improvements? And if you haven't, what signs can we look for that'll show that, hey, things are getting better and we are making progress towards better representation? What can we look for so we know that things are improving?
Thank you. I love this question because I actually have research. So currently, I've been working on a project. This is a MAGFest exclusive. But I've been working on a project that is examining gender and race through video game trailers. And I've coded 398 individual characters. I know, right? I was like, geez. So what I've seen through that, can't say anything definitively, but what I've seen so far is that the game development studios, they're not that concerned about race. They're more concerned about gender diversity. And that shows very clearly, right? There's a reason why we have representation of a new Laura Croft, a Michonne, right? But there's also a big difference on why we see more people who look like a Laura Croft than a Michonne. Does that make sense? So is representations based in a race context? So we're talking about just race and is getting better. I can only speak to a sense that in some ways, yes, right? In some ways, yes, but in a lot of ways, no. Because what will happen is we will start to say, yes, we like that black character, and then they will stick with that as an archetype. Then you just be in trophy after that. Once 3 games come out, it's like, it's all black and this guy got to offer, right? Marcus Holloway, great example, right? Watch Dogs 2, right? I like him, I really do. Tech guy, so black man in science. Yeah, he's a hood adjacent, really, right? So what does that mean, right? You can have a black person be affluent, right? But you can still create a narrative that you can wrestle with that, right? You can talk about these class differences, right? It's getting into what we call an intersectional approach, and that is where gaming should head. But as of right now, through my work, it's more about having women and men at an equal playing field. But yes, it's getting better, but very slowly. Thank you.
Hello again. Sorry for interrupting earlier. But I actually really like how you brought up intersectionality there, because the examples you showed, the 4 of them earlier in the panel, how you specifically pointed out Michonne was the only woman. And the thing is I really feel like it does sort of seem to be a tick off the boxes sort of thing for AAA games, like, oh, we have a minority character, that's it. And I just think that it's sort of, sorry, I was in the middle of composing my question, but basically, how do you think video games can try and engage more critically with the concept of, instead of having these stock stereotypes of this is what a LGBT person is, this is what a black person is, and so on. Do you have any, how do you think that they could engage more critically in actually depicting marginalized people as people?
Oh, okay. Cool. I know the answer to this question because someone else or several other people addressed this. If you don't know, as I mentioned, Kashona L. Gray, she recently released a book called Woke Gaming. That's the title of it, okay? Woke Gaming, edited by Kashona L. Gray and David J. Leonard. It's literally about that. right? So pick that up, and also pick up the other book that Dr. Gray also wrote called Feminism in Play, right? Pick that up as well, okay? Those will give you two good ways of understanding or thoughts about how we can get games to that next level, right? So read those.
Yeah, I'm an indie cartoonist, and so we're still sort of at that like weird plateau of like trying to push the diversity.
Read those,
I'm gonna throw some things out here, and you'll just like respond.
One question
Yeah.
for so many people.
Oh no, that's fine. So can you speak a little bit to the tension of, we have so many video games coming over from Japan and from Korea that have, like Japan has 99% of the Japanese population aren't Japanese, so they don't have the diversity that we have. And they don't have the ideas around blackness that we have, but we import all these games, and they're good quality games, but still you're not going to have the same type of representation in it that we have in our own American culture and our own American population. So can you speak to kind of the tension of like, how do you enjoy those games or not enjoy those games and still be aware and not be reinforced of white privilege that's coming across from other cultures and that sort of thing?
Oh, very good question. That's several articles I read, so that's the thing. It's a hard question. Okay, I'll put it as this. I study the fighting game community, which means I interact with fighting games all the time. Therefore, when I play Street Fighter, I have to deal with a very caricature depiction of a Native American, a very different caricature of an American in general, and then a very just like, I don't know, like depiction of a black person, right? I, as a black identified person, have to accept in some way, this is the game I want to play, therefore I have to pull back my identity. That's what it feels like, right? Like I have to remove, right, myself as a black identified person to enjoy this experience. There are hella games out there that I can't play because the depiction of blackness is so horrendous. I'm just like, I'm not touching that, right? Like for example, I mean, I played it, but I didn't know it was a thing because I had just missed it. In Deus Ex Human Revolution, came out in 2011, there is a black NPC, black woman, but she talks in like this, like, I hate the term slavery voice, but she talks as that like broken English kind of thing. I had no idea that was in the game until I saw gameplay footage of it, right? That's from Canada, right? That's EVO's Montreal, right? So when we think about like how other countries view blackness, honestly, I blame them, right, to think that blackness only can be a thing of these ways, but I also blame the culture because they're getting the information from somewhere, right? They're getting the information from somewhere. So that means how they're viewing blackness and all that stuff can be a reflection of how our own culture views black people, right? So if anything, I'm not just seeing a reflection of how they view of me, I'm viewing an international kind of perspective of how my own country views me. Does that make sense? Cool beans.
Earlier in your presentation, you spoke about a lot of stereotypes of how African American men and women are portrayed within the gaming, pretty much. As an extremely amateur writer, I would love to begin trying to portray and create characters of different ethnicities, origins, backgrounds, and I want to do so accurately, but at the same time, respectfully and equally. As we know, equality isn't just about ignoring differences, it's accepting those differences. Earlier you mentioned first and foremost that research is very important in understanding these things, but when it comes to it, I would like your insight. Where do you find the line between where to portray these differences and where to kind of, I suppose, I don't want to say gloss over them, but kind of put those on the back burner perhaps? Does that make sense?
Yes, you're getting at a very, it's tricky. Because you're trying to, basically what you're asking me is creative license to do whatever the hell you want to do. Because I'm not judging you. I'm just saying, you probably already have ideas about whatever identities you want to talk about, right? I'm not saying you can't do it, by all means do it. I'm just saying that you, must confront your own inherent biases that you have about the culture, right? So therefore, if you're going to write a black story, you already have some idea of what blackness is. You do, naturally, right? So that means you have to challenge yourself on that front. The way you challenge yourself is read, right? So read an Audre Lorde, stuff like that, right? And then also talk to, African Americans, right? But also, you must be comfortable with the fact you will, and excuse my French, fuck up regardless, right?
Oh, yeah.
But should that stop you? No, because the process of knowing where you effed up at, and then you have people telling you, challenging you on your thoughts, you should take that as the most thoughtful feedback ever to reiterate on the other thing, right? It's a continuous process, right? You'll never get a point where it's like, I know what it means to know about Mexican history or anything like that. You won't get to that point because we're still currently living. Does that make sense? So as you write, right, you will go through this particular struggle. But that means you should have some checks and balances within your writing process to make sure, okay, well, this is what I have based on these kinds of things, these kinds of assumptions, right? And then go from that. So just know you will fuck up, but will that stop you? No. But if you don't learn from your mistakes, then that's why I have this panel. Does this make sense?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay, let's try like this. Okay, there we go. So I missed a fair chunk of the initial presentation. I apologize. So I apologize for that. I apologize again if this was brought up prior. But you brought up black culture before and how there are some, shall we say, unsavory aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, are you familiar with the show 1968 that was on CNN a few months ago?
No.
It very briefly discussed sort of the birth of black culture, how it was born of sort of an offshoot of rejection. Okay, you will not let us integrate into your society, so we will create our own. That being said, of course, I'm sure there are most people who share this sentimentality, who grew up playing video games other than sports games, something like that, got picked on for it. Do you think that there will ever be a time where, of course, everyone could just kind of be in the gaming landscape? It's like, oh, hey, live neighbor projects, but yeah, I'll play Final Fantasy or what's a different example?
So is your question about will there be a moment that a person can just play whatever, or what's the
pretty much, and not be scrutinized too much for it, since it generally flies in the face of black culture, quote unquote.
Oh, okay.
Like being in the RPGs instead of being in the sports games.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. No time soon. The reason I say it that quickly because again, you're asking. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
You're asking for people to get to the point where we no longer start to subjugate other people based on identities, right?
Within the community itself.
Right. You're asking for you're going for gold with this question because in some reality, yes. Peace on earth, all that stuff, yes. But currently, it's not a tangible thing to grasp onto as of yet. However, when it comes to us as being a part of the gaming community, we have to make sure we are protecting our own. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So that means
gamers at large, or
Gamers
I say minority gamers.
Gamers are, like, see, here's the thing. When you say minority gamers, you are subjugating yet again. Does that make sense?
Well, that's why, like, dare I say, sort of finger quotes. Kind of
Right. What I'm saying is, with minority gamers, do we have to be mindful of these particular identities that are salient to us and ourselves? Yes. But that means the gaming culture at large should be aware of those identities, accept them, and protect each other, right? From others who are trying to chastise them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that means all of us in some way should be out of the mindset that it's just like if you see someone saying, oh, there's a woman playing in, like, oh my gosh, shut that shit down. There's no other way to do it. Because if you don't shut it down the moment it happens, that gives people license to do it. If they leave the game, then oh wow, guess who's turning up in Call of Duty some more? That's, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? So that's pretty much where I'm going with that, right? So will there be a moment where we can finally just come together as gamers and no longer just see ourselves as this thing and that thing, but multiple things, but all like around gaming? Yes. And honestly, we should continuously work and strive for that goal.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool beans. Thank you.
Well, said he asked that question because it gave me a second question, but we won't go with the first one.
One question.
In terms of, I've always wanted to be a part of the industry. It's kind of just one of the things I've always wanted to do. But as I've learned more about how a lot of these bigger companies operate and act and when they manipulate and mess with their games, I've less and less wanted to become a part of, say, an EA or a CD Projekt Red, or even just you can pick a company and they all have their points and flaws.
Okay, of time, what's the question?
So the question is, fundamentally, is how do you feel about people starting their own kind of thing? Is there any advice you can give towards corralling people together to really start their own things, particularly for Black people?
Are you talking about like create your own like gaming company, gaming studio?
Yes, yes.
And how to get people a part of that agenda?
Yes. Because you said we need a force that tries to put us in there, but I'd rather not rely on anybody else. It's not my thing. I want to get people together myself.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I actually do have something to interject. There is a person downstairs called In the Shapes Meow, and they actually have a con called Minorities in Gaming in New York City, Harlem, and they hold it every year. So that's actually something to think about if you're interested in that.
So,
something like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so you say you don't want to rely on anyone else, right? First of all, wrong interpretation of the thing. If you're doing game development, you are inherently working with other people. Otherwise, you'll never produce a game. You'll be, I will say you're 15 years old. By the time you are ready to ship that game, it is probably 15 years too outdated, right, to be relevant. Does this make sense? Next thing, right? Next thing, if you want to go into game development, I'm not a game developer, right? But I'm thinking that if you want to get into game development spaces, you can find these spaces via a variety of things, right? There are probably hella game developers walking around here at this moment. You have to do the work yourself on knowing where these people are. If you're trying to like attract people of color, that means you have to do the work of going to the platforms, all right, and shouting out, okay, I would like people of color in particular to apply for said things, right? If you also fund the project yourself, right, you have to invest into it, right? That means you have to go all in. That means you need to take a loan out to make sure that your game has hella representation of people of color, developed by people of color, then that all means that is exactly what you have to do. Does that make sense? So, cool beans. We can chat later on. Okay, this will have to be the last person, but I'm still around. So cool.
All right. Thank you for that. So this question is targeted at a subject of stereotypes and representation of people of color, or like any group in video games. This kind of came up when you were talking about the character Augustus Cole from Gears of War. Obviously, that's a pretty consistent trope with black characters in media, and creators should look at it to diversify the treatment of people of color. But I wanted to ask if you think tropes like that are inherently destructive, or if they're destructive only in bulk or when used as default. And then, in like continuation of that, like, do you think that character archetype is a valid character representation for people of color or anyone who want to identify with energetic, boisterous, and masculine characters, as long as there exists representation of people of color alongside it?
Y'all go for gold with these questions. Are all tropes inherently like evil or something like that? It's tricky because if I say yes, right, then that could obfuscate on how other people envision their own work.
Right.
If I say no, then that's definitely problematic, right? What I will say is that when we start to think that this is as far as we can get with a particular character, that means we are no longer in a creative mindset. Therefore, we are now bored. We are now lazy with the interpretations. So, to address your question very directly, if all I saw was an Augustus cult in every goddamn video game I played, I would stop playing those particular games.
Right.
Because obviously, my blackness only goes as far as beating monsters up with the giant chain machine gun thing, right?
Right.
And it can only speak in this particular slang.
Okay.
It becomes tropey when that becomes the default reliance of that culture, right? Of that people. Does this make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that means if I see Augustus Colt one more effing time,
It's enough,
done.
Augustus.
Yeah, like I'm done. I'm done. Like I bought Gears of War 4, but after that, I'm done.
Right.
Right? Because now it's mockery. Does this make sense?
Yeah, so it's like taking a archetype and defaulting them becomes disrespectful to the entire group because it's defining them as just that single person.
Exactly, because intersectionality is a thing and we must practice it like it's an actual fucking thing. Okay, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.